All right, well, thanks so much for coming. It's encouraging to see so many people who want to learn, and hopefully by the time we're done, you will have achieved that. So, this could be kind of dry. It's, dates and facts and stuff, but I'll try and throw some anecdotes and some actual quotes from Nicholas's life, and then what I call shiny paper diversions. That's where I was doing research, got interested in something else, went off, came back. They're in there. So how many people have seen our John Devereux talk? Yeah, so some of the early stuff will look familiar because, the lineage was the same. All right, so the first question I usually hear is, Devereux's a French name. How are these guys Irish? So this chart talks about where the name came from and how they came to America. So Devereux was a town in Normandy in France, and at the time they didn't have last names. They had either their occupation, Smith or whatever, or if you were nobility, which they were, they would say what their township was. So Devereux means of Devereux, so Devereux. All right, so that says how they got their name. Now, how did they get from France to Utica? All right, there's a little bit of history here. So, in the Norman Conquest, first of all, you got to know the Devereux were fighters. They were knights and fighters. So, in the Norman Conquest, two of the Devereux brothers, Walter and Edward, did I do that right? Walter and William. Don't get old. Walter and William fought for William the Conqueror, and as a reward, they were given what's called a knight's fee. And a knight's fee was not money, it was enough land for a knight to live comfortably. So he gave them land in Wales. Now, Walter had two sons, Robert and Edward, and if you're familiar with English history, and you've heard of Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, he was Queen Elizabeth I's boyfriend until she had him beheaded. Save money on his apron. And Edward is the line that from which the Irish people came. So now, 100 years later, the Norman invasion of Ireland, Dermot McMurrough was the king of Leinster. He was deposed, and he wanted his kingship back, so he went to Wales for help. And Strongbow came to his rescue, but also joining the fight was Sir Philip Devereux. And so they were successful, and he was awarded a knight's fee in Wexford. So now we got them from France to Wales to Ireland. So, do you like that? What's that from, anyone? No one knows SpongeBob? All right, so they settled in a place in Wexford near Enniscorthy called the Left. And through the next 20 or 30 generations, they kept marrying Irish women, because that's what we do. And it said that they became more Irish than the Irish themselves. And that brings us to Thomas of the Left. So Thomas Devereux married Catherine Corish. And are you ready? Taking notes. They had a son, Walter, then James, then John, who we're kind of familiar with, Margaret, Mary, Thomas. Okay, so they didn't just fight. Catherine. There's no nuns in here, are there? I usually offend the priest or a nun at one time. Luke, and then the subject of this talk, baby brother Nicholas. And they all lived comfortably in the Left until 1798. So, a real quick recap of the Irish Rebellion of 1798. The aim was by the United Irishmen to overthrow British rule in a nutshell. And Thomas Devereux and his sons were very much supportive, both in money and philosophy. And most of the fighting did happen around Wexford, so they were right there. They had some early victories. They got confident, maybe overconfident, and they decided to have a one-time winner-take-all fight at Vinegar Hill. It did not go well. They outnumbered the British 2-1, but they had pikes, where the British had guns. And the French were supposed to show up, but they didn't. So the effects ultimately, and they were roundly defeated. And the effects were that the Devereux family lost most of their land. Thomas was in prison, died either in prison or shortly after being released when he was sick. Walter had a price on his head, the oldest brother, and he escaped to, everyone thinks, Martinique, because he was never heard from again. Brother James was killed. But what about John? Well, John wasn't the fighter that the other ones were. He had gone to France 2 years earlier to learn how to play fiddle and dance. Might have been the smartest one of them all. So he left France and came to America in 1797 with no trade per se. All he had was his good looks, noble bearing, knowledge of fiddle and dance. And so he set up a dance studio and a music studio in New England, various locations. And the family lore said that he danced $1,000 out of the Yankees. That's not the New York Yankees. Steinbretters don't get rid of that money. And oh, how he parlayed that money. So in 1802, with $24,000 today, he set up shop. He stopped in Albany first, where he worked for a couple of years, and may have met his first wife there. But he decided to go off on his own. He looked first at Rome, but Dominic Lynch wouldn't sell him land. He only wanted to rent land. And he said, no, that's not what I'm looking for, so he went back to Utica and set up shop there in 1802. So at the time, everything was located around the Mohawk River and the fording area. There was a stagecoach line. There was boats coming down the Mohawk River. And there's only 90 houses and only 200 people in Utica. Yeah. But with his foresight and possibly good luck, he set up shop there with 2 other stores in the area. But he noticed the benefit and the benefit of being on a transportation route. So this store started out with dry goods and groceries, and eventually expanded to include whiskey and gin and the stuff we all need. And Moses Bagg, one of the earliest Utica historians, is quoted as saying, he had energy, shrewdness, and industry, a temper most generous, a tongue that was persuasive and fluent, and manners benignant and polished. These brought him quick custom and ensured his success from the outset. In other words, he was Irish. That established them as a perfect route for imports from New York City and exports to New York City and to the rest of the world. There wasn't much happening at the West at the time. Well, they did succeed, and the 2 stores that were in the area, John Post and Jeremiah Van Rensselaer, eventually closed up or burned down. And the Devereux business quickly grew. So he brought his brothers, Thomas, Luke, and Nicholas, from Ireland to help out. So Thomas came first. He worked a little bit clerking. He ended up setting up Utica Distillery and ran that for a while. But then he eventually went back to Ireland, got married, never came back, sent his son, John Corish Devereux Jr., to Utica, and John Corish Devereux and his wife adopted him. John Devereux never had kids. Then came Luke, who also clerked, but he later found himself in Natchez, Mississippi. I'm not sure why. In one of my shiny paper diversions, I found that there are other well-to-do Devereuxs, excuse me, in Natchez, Mississippi. So it might have been a cousin that he was getting set up with. But he died of wastrel, which is kind of a no good and he died from yellow fever in 1818. And then Nicholas, who was 17 years younger, came over. Man, I should have made this font bigger. Oh, I could wear my glasses.
Pretty big here.
Yeah, I know. No one's gonna own it? I went to church once, I really did, and while I was there, someone's phone went off, and the priest kind of stopped. He goes, if someone wants to answer the phone, and no, I know what it was. Someone came in and said, someone left their car running and locked out in the parking lot. Do you think anyone got up? They're like, I'll run out of gas first. Anyway, if you don't have to answer your phone, at least silent it. So in 1806, a 15-year-old Nicholas came over. He was given 3 coins per their family custom when they sent someone over. And the voyage probably took about between 6 and 12 weeks. He was alone, 15 years old. And when he landed in New York City, the first thing he did was went to the only Catholic church. And at the first mass, when the collection plate came around, he put in one of his 3 coins. Yeah. And the sexton said, sir, you might be confused. This is America, you know. You might not have, that's worth more than, and he said, no, I knew what I was doing. I wanted to thank God for a safe voyage. So, that was his first business investment, his first business transaction in the new country. Was it a good one? Yeah. Good Lord, yeah. I have to do this for my head. All right, so in 1806, he started, for the first 3 years, he started working with John, learning the business of business, and learning how to have a tongue so fluent and, you know, good malignant beneficence, being like John. In 1809, he was offered a better job from a very successful and big merchant store in Albany called William James and Company, and he worked there for another 4 years, and then he returned to Ireland when their mother died, to take care of the family affairs. When he came back in 1814, he did go back to Devereux, and he was made a partner, and the company was renamed John C. and Nicholas Devereux, with John providing the capital and the goodwill, and Nicholas being a very, very shrewd banker and speculator and investor. So 1817 came. Turns out to be a pretty pivotal year in the life of Nicholas Devereux. By the way, we do have a descendant of Nicholas Devereux in the crowd here, so if you hear someone yelling out, "That's not right," that's Stephen Kernan over there sitting over there. Thank you for coming. He's directly from Nicholas and Mary Dober's oldest daughter, Hannah. So Hannah and Francis Kernan. He's from that line. So construction on the Erie Canal began, as you all know, in 1817, on July 4th. He became a U.S. citizen later after the summer, and then he married Mary Dober Butler on November 28th. So Mary was born to a well-to-do family. I think in Connecticut, I could be wrong. Her father, Dr. Benjamin Butler, was a surgeon turned land agent turned banker turned merchant. At one point, he was in the top 10 richest men in the state. He was one of 20 members on the New York Stock Exchange. And Nicholas, being the speculator land agent, that's good. His business trips would take him to New York City, and that's where he met the Butlers. And so Dr. Butler wasn't quite sure what he thought about this guy, and he wrote, N. Devereux is here and much at our house. He appears to pay Mary more particular attention than a common visitor. Let me know, he wrote this to his son-in-law. Let me know when, thanks, who and what it is that in other words, should I come in and put a stop to this? He eventually relented at saying, I love this part, we have finally decided that Mary takes N. Devereux for better or worse. And so they were married. Now other changes came up. Can I move this up here next? Without unhooking everything? One time I was at this podium. Whoa. And in the podium. Are we not there? Oh, too many kids. Yeah. So one time I was sitting here at the podium, and there's the sliding door in here. So I put my beer on it. And yeah, I didn't realize that I was pushing forward. And I'm closing the drawer, which fit in snugly, but the beer didn't. So it just smashed on the floor. Anyways, hang on. Mike, is there a way I can kill this next slide? So it shows up bigger. And that's why he was grandmaster. He's the only one who had it. So from 1818 to 1820, the Devereux's life, personal and business, changed a lot. By 1819, the section of the canals from Utica to Rome was completed, offered great business advantages, and of course Devereux, with his forward-thinking business sense, saw a great opportunity to extend the business to the west. Picture changes indeed. And on the home front, they had some changes too. Nicholas and Mary lost a son in 1818, lost another one in 1819, but finally in December 1820, they welcomed the daughter Hannah Avery Devereux. And they also had a home now that they could call their own. They used to live with John and Mary with a growing family. They did move to a building on Whitesboro Street that had been originally built for the Manhattan Bank. Now, jumping to 1819 or so, up to 1819, there was no Catholic church west of Albany. And John Devereux, having the money and being a devout Catholic, if you didn't get the feeling that Nicholas was a devout Catholic, donating a third of his money to the Catholic Church, it got even more pronounced. But John used to go to church in Albany. He was a trustee at St. Mary's. But even this got a little arduous. If you can imagine the trip of a horse-drawn carriage to Albany at 4 miles an hour every Sunday. So he convinced them to come to Utica and say a mass there. So the first mass in Utica was said in 1813 at his home. This boulder with the plaque is still there at the corner of Broad and 2nd Street. But that wasn't enough. So with the increase of Catholics coming through the state, primarily because of the Erie Canal, but also work on the railroad, the diocese, which was, I believe, at the time still the New York City diocese, they recommended the foundation of a church west of Albany, and so they incorporated the first Catholic church in the Western District of New York. That was the name of the corporation. And John and Nicholas were among the founding trustees. They also donated money for it. And the land was donated by Mr. and Mrs. Morris Miller, also Utica named probably know. The illustration, by the way, was done by Hannah Devereux Kernan 5 years later. Yeah. So if you go to St. John's Church, their presence is still there and acknowledged. There's the portraits of them when we first walk in. And then Father Tom brought down this simple little table, smaller than this, which is said where the first Mass was said at John Devereux's home. He would not give it to us. And I didn't see the sense in fighting a priest for it. So. Now, they also, as laborers came through working on the canal, a lot of Irish laborers came through. They were making money. They didn't trust banks. They didn't trust other construction workers. Remember, they were new immigrants to the area. But they trusted the Devereux brothers. So the Devereux brothers actually had a strong box that they would accept the laborers' money. They invested the money, which was new, paid them dividends on it. And so that strong box, as far as I know, is still at the M&T Bank on Genesee Street. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So, see that picture on the top there? That was from a famous, well, a painting by a famous watercolor artist, Edward Clark. He did a lot of stuff for Utica. And this is one of my shiny paper diversions. So, some sources in literature say that this was the original spot of the Savings Bank of Utica, which it was, but they claim that it was at 167 Genesee Street. So I looked at what's on that kind of area on Genesee Street now, and I didn't see anything like that with a church. That's the food. And other places put it at 10 Bleecker Street or 10 or 12 Bleecker Street, and that made more sense. So I tried to marry up what I knew and what I could find. So from an 1839 map, you can see on the left, Second Baptist Church. Right there next to it is J.C. Devereux, Mayor's Office and Savings Bank. The map is 1839, or as of 1839, and at that point, John Devereux was the mayor. He had been appointed by the Common Council, and he would later be elected, the first publicly elected mayor in 1840. So I kind of, you kind of get the idea. So all I have to do now is look at where the Second Baptist Church is. So how did that compare to the watercolor painting? Well, there's the painting on the left. If the church on the left is the Second Baptist Church, I needed to find out more about that. And I found, actually, it was a really cool page on the abolitionist movement, because the Abolitionist Society was meeting here in 1835. It was supposed to be at the old academy, the courthouse on Academy Street, but kind of a riot ensued, and so they said, we don't want you meeting here, so they ended up moving it to the Second Baptist Church, and this illustration was in there, and they're identical. I mean, if you look at the windows and the spires and all that stuff. So now I know that this was from the Bleecker Street residence, but where on Bleecker Street? So here's the painting. There's another map. Shows the Baptist Church on the leftmost of that plot. That plot is between Genesee Street and Charlotte. Another map, I was fortunate enough to see the numbering of Bleecker Street at the time, because it's not numbered that way anymore. So where the red box is 10 and 12. So now it kind of looks like in the middle of that block. So what is that now? Well, in the I don't know cars, so this could be from the 40s, 50s, or 60s, but when W.T. Grant was there, you see that tall building next to it, another building next to that, and then nothing. So the Second Baptist Church was torn down in 1899. So now, was that bank in the building that's on the left, or in the tall building, or in the long stretch of stores. Right now, that long stretch of stores, you can see on the bottom right, is where Off-Center Records is, and there's a tattoo place. And then there's the tall building, and then there's nothing. So even that other building that was left most was gone. And to the left more of that is the bus station, essentially. So now, is it in the tall building or the long stretch? I don't know. And then the shiny paper god said, you've got a presentation to write, so put this away. So I did. Anyways, one more. I said, shiny paper, give me one more. So I overlaid where 10 and 12 is supposed to be onto an overhead of where it is now. And it says there that it's in the block where Off-Center Records is. By the way, I went to Off-Center Records, I said, this used to be the Devereux Bank? And he didn't know what I was talking about. But it's kind of cool because there's metal spiral staircase going down to the basement, so I'm like, yeah. So I don't know. Anyways, in 1818, there was so much money that they decided to apply for a charter for a bank. Had they done it, it would have been the first in the country. But they didn't put it into effect because by that time, the Erie Canal was still moving west, so the laborers moved west, so they really didn't need it at that point. But eventually they did. Population skyrocketed, money came back in, and so they reapplied for a charter in 1839. That became the Savings Bank of Utica, which we all know is the Federal Bank. And again, having lost out to somewhere in Philadelphia for the first official banking institution, savings bank. John Devereux was the first president, and Nicholas was on the board of directors. And here's a photo, photo from 1839. This is Stalin Williams, who started out the clerk, but he's measuring a depositor. Anyone know why he would be doing that? Yeah, that's all they had. They had little index cards on all the depositors with a description of them and their height and stuff, so he would measure them as they came in to see if they were who they said they were. Yeah. So now we're in 1821. Business is thriving. Banking business is thriving. I said Stalin Williams took up the care of day-to-day banking, and Nicholas saw to the investments. He was getting very good at land speculation. He was also good at seeing the big picture. He also had some of John's moxie by now. 1821, he's 30. So by now, 1821, the canal had extended to Little Falls, and he was looking to expand their reach. So they purchased land adjacent to the canal, to Erie Canal, on 140 Genesee Street. And you might recognize this place. So this ended up being the Devereux block. Some of you, well, I wish this pointer worked. We just found out that the pointer works everywhere but on the screen. So, if you can see, right here, that's the ripples of the Erie Canal. So, yeah. That's how close they were to the Erie Canal. So they eventually built it started out with just a warehouse and an additional store, because their one store on Broad Street, Back Square, was growing so well. It eventually grew to this Flatiron building, and it stood for about 100 years, and then it fell to fire, a devastating fire in the 80s. It was torn down in 1990. So some of you may remember the White Tower at the narrow end of that building. And it was also in 1946 that workers working in the attic found the strongbox. Yeah, so that's why we have it today. At some point when they moved from Broad Street to here. So yeah. So by 1823, they had grown in stature, wealth, reach, and in the literature, it describes it, it summarizes it, the withdrawal from trade of their main competitors, that was Post and Van Rensselaer, the coming of the Erie Canal, and consequent quickening of commerce and settlement, which increased Utica's population, from 200 in 1802 to 3,000 in 1826 and 8,000 by 1830. All brought prosperity to John Nicholas Devereux as they expanded from local merchandising and commercial exporting to Europe, banking, manufacturing, land speculation, large-scale farming, and canal and railroad promotion. By the way, if someone can let me know when we get kind of near 10 out, so I don't make us too late. Tell me how much I have to go, how fast I have to go through this. And it was time for Nicholas and Mary to move up to another home. So Jeremiah Van Rensselaer, I already mentioned him once. He was a very, very successful businessman and franchisee. He was also the village president in 1805 and 1806, before they were a city. He owned a mansion on what is now the state office building, with elegant grounds, stables, gardens, a beautiful place, bounded by Blandina Street, Devereux Street, Genesee, and looks like Charlotte. He had downturns in his business in 1823, so he sold it to Nicholas Devereux for $7,000, which is about $216,000 today. And now it was known as the Devereux Estate. So by now John had fully retired. The business is now called Devereux and Company. Erie Canal was completed, and Devereux and Company owned two packet boats, the Utica and Rochester, which they ran between Utica and Rochester. And the Erie Canal Transportation Company also advertised that they were the sole agents in Utica, so they were doing all right. Nicholas's and Mary's family continued to grow also. They lost another baby in 1822, another son, but then gave birth to John C. Devereux in 1823, a daughter Catherine, and another daughter, Mary Butler. In 1827, there was kind of a call, 1827. Thank you for catching that mistake. They had to pay $90,000 within, and $90,000 was a lot of money. $90,000 within 90 days. So rather than go bankrupt, Nicholas's solution was to divide up his property into subdivisions, broken apart by streets, and sell them off. And not only did he pay the $90,000, he made a handsome profit too. So they continued to live there till 1830. From 1927 to 1830. More about his religious devotion. He's a deeply devoted and proud Catholic, which he showed in his private devotions. He read his own Bible from cover to cover 17 times. We have a letter that Mary Devereux wrote. It's in the museum office, that she tells her grandson, Nicholas E. Kernan. I can give you the dates of those 17 readings if you don't believe me. Anyways, this is a random thing. On a business trip to Hartford, Connecticut, he got in touch with the Catholics there so he could attend Mass in some way. But he found out that the atmosphere in the city was so negative towards Catholics because of the bigotry and the Know Nothing Party, the Know Nothing movement, anti-everything.
Yeah.
The parishioners didn't have the wherewithal to buy a church, and it looked like their dream was over. Well, Nicholas Devereux, even though a stranger, he gave them the $10,000 that they needed to buy the land of the church, and never made any noise about having to be repaid. But they ultimately tracked him down and didn't repay him. And in another case, when the American Bible Society refused to publish the Douay version of the Bible. The Douay version is kind of like the Catholic version of the Bible, translated from the Latin as opposed to the Protestant version, which is translated from the Greek. Simple paper. So he bought a set of plates and had them printed up, and then sold the plates, and eventually 40,000 copies were printed. But he's credited in the Devereux painting in St. John's. the plaque underneath says he's credited with bringing the first two-way Bible to the eastern United States. He also taught Bible school, religious instruction, whatever, Sunday school. And he would give any kid who could memorize St. John, the Gospel of John, he would give them a Bible, one of his Bibles. It gets better, Mike. Actually,
I had a higher calling.
make sure you flush.
She's in here.
And in 1830, there was no Catholic cemetery. They were buried way in the outskirts of town, which would have been near the Parkway, or in a potter's field. And it was named Potter's Field because it was a guy named Stephen Potter named Potter's Field. Anyways, in 1830, the Devereux donated land near Steuben and Elm Street for the first Catholic cemetery. Burials continued there from 1830 to 1843 when St. Agnes opened, but it was abandoned from 1843 to, well, 1896. In 1896, the Common Council of the city was growing and they needed more streets and more thoroughfares, so they envisioned a street adding to place that went right through the cemetery. Yeah, which at the time had, knocked over gravestones, cow traffic, and that kind of stuff. So, in 1903, they reinterred all the remains from that cemetery and brought them to St. Agnes and reinterred them there in a kind of a mass grave, yeah. And this monument, which you guys should see, it's really cool. We probably should have a talk on Addington too. Actually, last time I said we probably should have a talk on Nicholas Devereux. Yeah. Well, we probably should have a talk on Addington because Pat and I have been there. It's pretty, So, now Dr. Butler, who no longer believes he's satisfied that Nicholas isn't after his money, he set him up with some businessmen in New York City and recommended him to the board of the newly formed New York Life and Trust Company. And they dealt in this stuff, life insurance, estates, trusts, and land speculation and mortgages. So Nicholas, being the only land agent for the whole company west of New York City, he had an open slate. He had a clean slate to look at anything he wanted to in the West for opportunities. And he also had enough money now to purchase another estate on Chancellor Square. This is a Egbert Clark watercolor of that mansion. And this is what Chancellor Square looked like. It had been set up in 1810, coming from the Bleecker estate. And it was laid out as a public park. It was named Chancellor for James Kent, who was the Chancellor of New York. It was a popular place for picnics and staying cool in the summer. And this is kind of where it is now. It's now Chancellor Park, I believe. So you can see it's bounded on the right by Kent Street, named after James Kent, the Chancellor, but on the left is Academy Street, which is where the Utica Academy was, which served as a school and a courthouse. And this is the one where the anti-slavery convention was to be held. Right next door to Nicholas Devereux's home. 1835, he's out west doing land speculation, leaving his family and servants at home. Probably didn't sit well with him. So he's probably glad it moved. And it moved to the Second Baptist Church, which was right next to his office. So he was still right there. Now, how to account for his rise to the top? Man, the man is non-stop. Anyone know where that came from? Nobody. Danique, I'm putting you on the spot. How to account for his rise to the top? Man, the man is non-stop. That's from Hamilton. Peter, come on, get closer, will you? There's more to life than history. Anyways, this is from Nicholas's wife, Mary Gilbert. Mr. Devereux, this is very telling, so I had to use the whole thing. Mr. Devereux was very much occupied in business, allowing himself no leisure. I could only talk with him on Sunday. 2 Two of the clerks took their meals with us. The business was very extensive with tavern keepers and storekeepers of the smallest towns. And Mr. Devereux was often absent collecting and looking after bad debts. He also did the purchasing, which took him to New York City 4 or 5 times a year, 2 weeks at a time. It is well for my children to know how hard their father toiled and how simply we lived. He always breakfasted at 6 a.m., went to the store, worked hard, dined at 12, could scarcely take time to eat, tea at 6, then to the store writing up the business until 9 p.m. and to bed at 10. It was hard work all the time. So the man was nonstop. In the next few years, and saving the next few slides, he added to his family with the birth of a daughter, Cornelia, and the son, Thomas. Remember, he's only allowed to talk on Sundays. He helped establish the Utica branch of the Second Bank of the United States, helped establish the Utica and Schenectady Railroad, and with John contributed $5,000 each to establish the Utica's first Catholic school and orphan asylum at St. John's Church. And then he gets really busy. In 1835, he's got money, he's got business savvy, he's unexcelled in land speculation, he has contacts, he has status. And with all those assets being brought to bear, he puts his sight on the vast and largely undeveloped lands of Western New York. This isn't quite shiny paper, but a little bit. The Holland Land Company was formed in, how are we doing on time? You're supposed to let me know when it's quarter up. You're fired. All right, this will be quick. The Holland Land Company was formed in 1790 to buy a bunch of land in Western New York. They owned 3 million acres. You can see here from Lake Ontario down to Pennsylvania. They had bought that from another rich guy, Robert Morris, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution, but he was going broke, so they bought it. And they were good landlords. They were so interested in bringing in outsiders to set up villages and towns. They carved out townships. They designed Buffalo, the streets of Buffalo. And they were very forgiving of landowners who want to be landowners. They offered them 10 to 12 years to pay. They would take cattle in trade. They would take labor in trade. And for the most part, they were very good. But eventually, as the towns began to grow, the streets needed to be maintained. And the land company, when they did make money, they were sending them back, not reinvesting them into the area, they were sending them back to Holland. So they went to the state, and in 1833, the state legislature passed a law to tax foreign landowners. Well, that would have put the Holland Land Company out of business. So they divided up their land, sold off what they could, and Nicholas Devereux. So he saw this 400,000 acres that was for sale. He knew what it could become. He knew the Erie Railroad was coming through there. He knew the Erie Canal had ended at Buffalo in 1835. So he saw the future was bright. This is land to buy. But he also didn't have the money himself. So he formed a land company with 15 Manhattan businessmen, some from the Erie Railroad, some from the New York Life and Trust. And they bought 417,000+ acres for almost $14 million today. And his personal share of that came out to about 45,000 acres. He ended up passing up the business to his son, John C. Devereux in Ellicottville. Saving up a bunch of more slides, this is some more stuff he did. He applied for a second charter for the Savings Bank. He helped select the state hospital, the Civic Center. They built a Devereux block. He established 4 more Catholic churches in the Buffalo Diocese. He was an incorporator of Utica Gas Works, Utica Water Works, and Utica Steam Rolling Mills. And at that time, his brother John had been elected mayor. And Nicholas was often asked to enter politics, but he always refused. And in 1848, his beloved brother and mentor, John, died. But he still had some last deals in him. As part of his vision, he wanted to build an ideal city. He called it a university city, which would have, if you were building a city from scratch, it would have schools and stores and churches and more churches and roads. So he went to Rome, Italy. He met with the Pope and asked if he could recruit some Franciscan friars to come over and help organize this church in this ideal city. 3 friars and a layperson did come. Nicholas Devereux donated $5,000 and 200 acres of his farm in this ideal city, which he was calling Allegheny City. And from that, St. Bonaventure University was founded, in case you guys didn't know that. And as a tribute and for his role in the whole place, there's still Devereux Hall there. That's what the picture is. But he wasn't done. He had one more thing. Recognizing that there weren't enough priests, American priests, who could say the Catholic Mass, he went back to Italy, proposed an American college for the training of American priests, and then coming over and taking up churches in the New York area. This American college was built. He pledged that 100 American Roman Catholics would pay $1,000 each for such a college, and he made the pledge. He died before he could give it, but his family did honor his wish. That university is still in existence, called the Pontifical North American College. So these are the cleaned up gravestones of Mary Dillbear Butler Devereux, Nicholas Devereux, and what we believe is John C. Devereux's grave. It's at St. Agnes. So he died late December 1855 after a brief illness, worth about, at the time, $500,000, which is $18.6 million today. He was only 64 years old. So thousands of Uticans of every denomination paid their respects at his old home on Chancellor Square. And they lined the streets as his body was brought to St. Agnes Cemetery. But what's different, the attendees wouldn't allow the hearse to take him from Chancellor Square to St. Agnes Cemetery. Instead, they walked the casket. They carried it on their shoulders, 600 of them, taking turns. As one would drop off, they would take turns, and they walked it all the way to his final resting place. And I thought it was very fitting that the man who began his early career in Utica on the shoulders of his brother and the others who would come before him should, at the end of his life, be borne by his fellow countrymen to his final resting place. And that's what I got.